Bedřich Smetana was born in 1824. In almost all areas of history, we break things down into periods within which similar things occurred. In music, we have around 5 periods we talk about. The Renaissance period runs from roughly 1500 to 1650, and it includes the beginning of functional harmony and the formation of orchestras. God is still at the centre of most of the compositional process. The Baroque period runs from 1650 to 1750. In this period, the harpsichord becomes the basis of most of our groups, and we see things that look very familiar to us. Perhaps the most famous composers of this period are Bach and Handel. The classical period runs from around 1750 to around 1825. This period gives us some of music's most famous composers and works. Beethoven, Mozart and Haydn all lived in this period. From 1825 to 1900, we have the Romantic period. Big orchestras and thick harmonies dominate. Composers in this period include Berlioz, Schubert, Wagner and Dvorak. Smetana belongs in this period. After 1900, we have the 20th century, which is as it sounds. In this period, we got much dissonance, atonal music, and the ability to do pretty much whatever you wanted to do. Each generation of composers is trying to do the same thing, which is to be more expressive than the composers in the previous period. Smetana was born in the year 1824, the year Beethoven premieres his last symphony, the Ninth, which includes the Song of Joy. In Australia, it's the year Queensland was established with a convict colony in Moreton Bay, approximately 50,000 years after the first Indigenous settlements. It will still be 3 more years before European settlement of Western Australia starts in Albany. Smetana was born into the Habsburg Empire, centred on Vienna in Austria, at a time an enormous empire that included modern-day Czech Republic, Hungary and areas we once called Yugoslavia, Croatia, Slavonica, Dalmatia and Transylvania. These are the Central European countries that have been at war with each other and with invasions from the east, such as Russia, and the west, such as Germany, for millennia. Smetana was a talented piano player, introduced to music by his well-off parents. He moved to the capital of Bohemia, now known as the Czech Republic, Prague, when he was 15. He was identified as a talented pianist, and we now know he had contact with Franz Liszt, a Hungarian composer who lived from 1811 to 1886, and Hector Berlioz, a French composer who lived from 1803 to 1869. His life was full and not always easy. He lost 3 children and his wife to tuberculosis. He was sympathetic to revolutionaries who wanted his homeland to be free from foreign domination. He wasn't anti-monarchist, but he believed the state should be more supportive and less dictatorial. He made many enemies amongst the establishment and therefore couldn't get the kind of state roles he coveted until he was much older. As a Czech composer, he was eclipsed by the younger Antonin Dvorak, who lived from 1841 to 1904, but he was the first to advocate for Czech music rather than constantly playing the music by mostly dead Germans. He produced 2 influential Czech operas. The first, not heard much since the mid-19th century, was called The Brandenburgs in Bohemia, and that was in 1863. It was a critical success, and it signalled him as a producer of Czech music. The second opera has entered the standard literature and is one of 2 works we hear of his regularly. It's called The Bartered Bride and was written in 1866. By far the most famous of his works is the one you're studying here. The work is called Má vlast, which means My Fatherland. It is a combination of 6 things we call tone poems. The concept of a tone poem was developed by Franz Liszt, who we heard of earlier. He was a Hungarian composer and a virtuosic piano player. A tone poem, which is sometimes called a symphonic poem, is a large-scale orchestral work, usually in a single movement. They're often descriptive or programmatic in nature, and that is, they tell a story. Other famous tone poems include Finlandia by the Finnish composer Sibelius, Danse Macabre by the French composer Saint-Saëns, or Kakadu by the Australian composer Peter Sculthorpe. Má vlast is a series of 6 tone poems. Together, they are a musical description of the Czech Republic. So it's unusual for us to have 6 standalone tone poems combined into a portfolio, which he called Má vlast. It's a kind of classical concept album. There are 6 movements, and they are firstly the High Castle, which describes a castle in Prague. The Moldau is a description of the river of the same name from its initial spring until it links with the river Elbe, but more of this work in the next video. Saka is a warrior from an ancient Czech mythology that comprises the 3rd movement. The 4th movement is translated from Bohemian fields and groves. The 5th movement is named for the town of Tabor, and the last and 6th movement is named for a mountain in the Czech Republic, Blanik. The work was completed in 1880, though the tone poems were premiered separately from 1875. To put it in musical context, Brahms had written 2 of his 4 symphonies. All of Wagner's favourite operas had been premiered, and of course we are 60 years after the death of Beethoven and 60 years before the birth of John Lennon, as well as 67 years before the birth of John Adams. All movements share the same instrumentation, a large instrumentation consisting of piccolo, 2 flutes, 2 oboes, 2 bassoons, 4 horns, 2 trumpets, 3 trombones, a tuba, timpani, bass drum, triangle, cymbals, 2 harps, and strings, which commonly means 2 violin parts, viola, cello, and bass. Now, let's take a look at the second movement, the Moldau, in the next video.